Yes, hello. There's an unauthorized person at our community pool who's refusing to leave. Karen Mitchell clutched her phone tightly, her voice rising with each word. I've asked him repeatedly to show his pool pass, and he's being completely uncooperative. The July sun beat down on the Oakwood Estates community pool as Karen paced along the concrete edge, her designer sandals clicking rhythmically. From behind her oversized sunglasses, she kept watch on the man floating peacefully on a raft in the deep end. He appeared completely unbothered by her presence or the fact that she was actively reporting him to authorities. "Ma'am, is this person threatening you in any way?" the dispatcher asked. "Well, no, not physically." Karen lowered her voice to a stage whisper that carried across the water anyway. "But he doesn't belong here. I know everyone in this community, and I've never seen him before. I'm the vice president of the HOA board, and it's my responsibility to ensure only residents use our facilities." Across the pool, Marcus Johnson lay back on his float, appearing relaxed but acutely aware of every word Karen was saying. He had closed his eyes behind his sunglasses, determined not to engage further after their initial confrontation. The cool water lapped against his skin as he tried to reclaim the peaceful afternoon that had been interrupted 15 minutes ago when Karen had marched onto the pool deck demanding to see his resident ID. The community pool had been Marcus's sanctuary since moving into Oakwood Estates 3 weeks ago. After long days at the hospital where he worked as a cardiologist, the quiet evening swims helped clear his mind. Until today. "Officers will be there shortly," the dispatcher said. "Please don't approach the individual again." "Thank you." Karen ended the call with a satisfied tap and resumed her position on a poolside chair, crossing her legs and straightening her wide-brimmed hat. She pulled out her phone and began rapidly typing in the Oakwood Estates community chat group. Asterisk, attention neighbors. Unauthorized person at the pool right now. Police have been called. Stay safe, asterisk. Within minutes, curious residents began appearing at the pool gate, peering through the wrought iron bars at the unfolding drama. Karen greeted each with conspiratorial nods and hushed updates. "He just showed up and jumped in. No pool pass, nothing," she explained to Debbie from Unit 207. "When I asked for ID, he practically laughed in my face." Marcus finally sat up on his float, a movement causing gentle ripples across the water's surface. He paddled slowly to the pool's edge, hoisted himself out, and walked calmly to his chair where a towel and small cooler sat. He dried his face, took out a bottle of water, and checked his phone, all while ignoring the growing audience and Karen's narration of events. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Officer Rivers stepped through the pool gate, surveying the scene. A cluster of residents huddled near Karen and Marcus, sitting alone on the opposite side. "I'm the one who called," Karen announced, striding forward with purpose. "That man refuses to identify himself as a resident." Officer Rivera nodded. "I'll handle this, ma'am." Karen smiled triumphantly as the officer walked toward Marcus. Finally, justice would be served. Karen observed from a distance, arms crossed over her chest, a satisfied smile playing at her lips as she waited for the officer to escort the trespasser out. She had enforced Oakwood Estates rules diligently since being elected to the board 3 years ago. Under her watch, no unauthorized person would enjoy amenities that residents paid good money for in their monthly dues. "I understand there's been some confusion about whether you're a resident here," Officer Rivers said, shaking Marcus's hand. "No confusion on my end," Marcus replied. He reached for his phone on the chair. "I moved in 3 weeks ago. Unit 412 in East Building." "Do you have any identification that shows your address?" "I do." Marcus opened his wallet and handed over his driver's license. "My address hasn't been updated yet, but I have the deed to my condo right here on my phone." He pulled up the document and showed the officer. Karen's smile began to falter as the conversation continued longer than expected. She moved closer, straining to hear their exchange. "Everything appears to be in order, Dr. Johnson," Officer Rivers said, returning the license. "Thank you for your cooperation." Karen's jaw dropped. "Doctor." The officer turned to address Karen. "Ma'am, Mr. Johnson is indeed a resident here. He purchased Unit 412 last month. There seems to be no issue." "That's impossible," Karen sputtered. "The Wilsons live in 412. The Wilsons moved out in June," Marcus explained calmly. "I closed on the property July 1st. I even attended the last HOA meeting and introduced myself, though you arrived late." Several onlookers began to murmur among themselves. Someone in the back called out, "He was at the meeting, Karen. Remember?" He asked about the recycling schedule. Karen's cheeks flushed bright red beneath her carefully applied bronzer. "Well, you still need a pool pass. That's the rule. Everyone needs proper identification at community facilities. Like this." Marcus held up a laminated card with the Oakwood Estates logo. "The property manager gave it to me when I moved in. I had it in my cooler the whole time. You never actually asked to see it. You just accused me of trespassing." Officer Rivera cleared his throat. Ma'am, falsely reporting an emergency is a serious matter. Dr. Johnson has every right to be here. The gathering crowd had grown silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Among them stood Patricia Winters, the HOA president, who had arrived after seeing Karen's message in the community chat. Karen, Patricia said, stepping forward, we need to talk. Her voice was measured but firm. Officer, we apologize for the misunderstanding. Dr. Johnson is indeed a new owner here. Karen felt the weight of everyone's stares. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was protecting the community, wasn't she? Enforcing the rules that everyone had agreed to follow. I was just doing my duty as vice president, she insisted, but her voice had lost its earlier authority. We'll discuss this at the next board meeting, Patricia replied quietly. Officer Rivera turned back to Marcus. Sorry for the disturbance, sir. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Marcus nodded. Thank you, officer. Karen stood frozen, watching as her position of power crumbled beneath her feet. The following day, Karen sat at her kitchen island, furiously typing on her laptop. The humiliation from yesterday's pool incident still burned in her chest. Her husband, Greg, watched cautiously from the doorway. Don't you think you should just let this go? He suggested, setting his coffee mug down. It was an honest mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Karen snapped, not looking up from her screen. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all residents must display their pool passes visibly while using community facilities. Yet it's hidden in a cooler. That's a violation. Greg sighed. Karen, you called the police on a man who was legitimately living here. I didn't know that at the time, she retorted, clicking send on an email to the entire HOA board. And now I've drafted a proposal for stricter enforcement. All residents should wear their passes on lanyards. No exceptions. Greg shook his head and left for work, knowing his wife wouldn't be reasoned with when she was like this. Karen spent the morning crafting her defense and reorganizing the HOA violation spreadsheet she maintained meticulously. By noon, she was ready to resume her daily neighborhood patrol. Armed with her phone camera and a notepad, she set out to document infractions, garbage cans left out past collection day, unauthorized lawn ornaments, improperly trimmed hedges. As she rounded the corner near the east building, she spotted Marcus Johnson unloading groceries from his car. Karen hesitated, then straightened her shoulders and continued walking. She wouldn't be intimidated in her own community. Marcus noticed her approach and nodded politely. Good afternoon. Karen returned a tight smile. Dr. Johnson. She paused, then added, I hope there are no hard feelings about yesterday. I was simply following protocol. Protocol would have been asking to see my pool pass, not immediately calling the police, Marcus replied calmly. But I understand you were doing what you thought was right. His measured response only irritated Karen further. Well, you should know that I proposed a new rule requiring visible pool passes at all times. The board votes next week. Interesting timing, Marcus commented, gathering his grocery bags. I've also submitted a proposal for next week's meeting. Bo, Karen couldn't hide her surprise. New residents rarely engage with HOA matters so quickly. Yes, a diversity and inclusion committee to review community policies and enforcement practices. Marcus maintained steady eye contact. Patricia seemed quite receptive to the idea. Karen's fingers tightened around her notepad. This community has functioned perfectly well for years without such committees. Has it? Marcus raised an eyebrow. I've been talking with several neighbors who seem to have different experiences with rule enforcement. Quite illuminating conversations. Before Karen could respond, her phone chimed with an incoming email. It was from Patricia, calling an emergency board meeting for that evening. The subject line read, Discussion of recent community incidents. I should get going, Marcus said, nodding toward his groceries. See you at the meeting tonight. Tonight? Karen echoed. Yes, Patricia invited me as a special guest. Didn't she tell you? With that, Marcus walked away, leaving Karen standing on the sidewalk, her patrol forgotten. Back home, Karen paced her living room, alternating between checking her phone for supportive messages from other board members and rehearsing her defense. None of the board members had responded to her earlier email about the new pool pass policy. At 6:45 p.m., she arrived at the community center 15 minutes early as always. To her shock, the parking lot was nearly full. Emergency board meetings typically attracted only the 5 board members, yet tonight it appeared half the community had turned out. Inside the community center, chairs had been arranged in rows facing the board table. Karen noted with growing unease that Patricia had set up a projector and screen. This wasn't the usual format for emergency meetings. As residents filed in, Karen took her seat at the board table, arranging her notes precisely. She nodded stiffly to fellow board members, Raj, Diane, and Tom, who seemed uncharacteristically quiet. Quite a turnout, Karen remarked to Diane. Word travels fast, Diane replied without meeting Karen's eyes. At exactly 7 p.m., Patricia called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We have some important community matters to discuss. Karen straightened in her chair, prepared to defend her actions at the pool. Before we begin, Patricia continued, I'd like to introduce our newest homeowner, Dr. Marcus Johnson, who has graciously agreed to share some insights with us tonight. Marcus stood from his seat in the front row and moved to stand beside the board table. Thank you, Patricia. Good evening, everyone. Karen's fingers drummed silently against her notepad as Marcus addressed the room with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to public speaking. I've only been a resident here for 3 weeks, but I've already experienced something troubling that I believe warrants community attention, Marcus began. Yesterday, I was reported to police as a trespasser while using the pool, a facility I have every right to access as a homeowner. Murmurs rippled through the audience. What concerns me isn't just that this happened, Marcus continued, but that this appears to be part of a pattern. Patricia dimmed the lights and clicked to the first slide on the projector. Karen gasped. It was a spreadsheet, her spreadsheet, documenting community violations. But someone had added columns analyzing the data by resident demographics. This is the HOA violation tracking document, Patricia explained. After yesterday's incident, several residents came forward with concerns about selective enforcement. We analyzed 3 years of violation reports. The next slide showed a bar graph with clear disparities in how violations were reported and enforced across different resident groups. This is outrageous, Karen interjected, her voice tight. That data is confidential board information. How did you access it? It's in the shared board drive, Karen, Raj replied quietly. We all have access. The point is, Patricia continued firmly, the data shows troubling patterns that we cannot ignore. Certain residents receive violation notices at 3 times the rate of others for identical issues. Karen felt the room's attention shift to her. Those residents committed more violations, she insisted. I document everything fairly. Like my garbage can being out 10 minutes past the cutoff time, called Mrs. Gutierrez from the back row. 3 violation notices in 1 month, or my children's basketball hoop that was 2 inches too tall, added Mr. Washington. When the Peterson's play structure violates the same height restriction. More voices joined in, sharing similar experiences. Karen's face burned as the stories mounted. This isn't about one incident at the pool, Marcus stated calmly. It's about ensuring our community governance treats everyone equally and respectfully. Patricia clicked to the next slide. Proposed Oakwood Estates Equity Review Committee. Karen sank into her chair. This wasn't an emergency meeting to address a pool incident. This was a reckoning. As the meeting progressed, Patricia outlined the proposed Equity Review Committee that would examine all HOA policies and enforcement procedures. Karen barely heard the details through the roaring in her ears. How had this happened so quickly? Just yesterday, she'd been confidently enforcing the rules as she always had. I move that we vote on establishing the committee, Raj said when Patricia finished presenting. Second, Tom added immediately. Karen found her voice. This is completely unnecessary. Our bylaws have served us well for years. What we need is stricter enforcement, not more bureaucracy. She pulled out her own proposal. I drafted a new policy for pool passes. Karen. Patricia interrupted gently but firmly. We're discussing the Equity Review Committee right now. Your pool pass proposal can be reviewed at the next regular meeting. Or by the new committee, someone called from the audience, triggering scattered laughter. Karen's cheeks flamed. I demand to know who compiled this so-called analysis of the violation records. This feels like a personal attack. Marcus stepped forward. I have a background in data analysis from my research work. Patricia provided the raw data, and I simply organized it by category and demographics. The numbers speak for themselves. All in favor of establishing the Equity Review Committee? Patricia asked, moving forward with the vote. Raj, Diane, Tom, and Patricia all raised their hands. 4-1. The motion passes, Patricia announced. Now we need to discuss the immediate issue from yesterday's pool incident. Karen sat straighter. Finally, they would address the real violation. Marcus hiding his pool pass instead of displaying it properly. Patricia continued, the board has reviewed the community's emergency response policy. Calling police for non-emergency rule violations is not an appropriate first step in enforcement. Effective immediately, all potential violations must first be reported to property management during business hours. And if violations occur after hours, Karen challenged. Unless there's an immediate safety concern, documentation and reporting the next business day is the proper procedure, Patricia explained. So people can just break rules in the evenings and weekends with no consequences. Karen couldn't believe what she was hearing. Marcus spoke up. The consequences don't disappear, they're just handled through proper channels rather than escalating immediately to law enforcement. Several residents nodded in agreement. There's one more item to address, Patricia said, her tone growing more somber. Karen, as vice president, your actions yesterday violated our good neighbor policy by escalating a simple verification matter to law enforcement without attempting proper resolution. Karen's stomach dropped. I was enforcing the rules. The board has voted to issue you a formal warning, Patricia continued. Any similar incidents will result in removal from your position as vice president. A formal warning, the very thing Karen had issued to countless residents over minor infractions. The irony wasn't lost on her, nor on the residents watching with rapt attention. This meeting is adjourned, Patricia announced. The newly formed Equity Review Committee will meet next Tuesday. All residents are welcome to attend. As people began to disperse, Karen remained frozen in her seat, staring at her untouched proposal for stricter pool pass enforcement. Neighbors she'd cited for violations over the years walked past without acknowledging her, except for Mrs. Gutierrez, who paused briefly. Maybe now you'll understand how it feels, the older woman said quietly before walking away. They ambushed me, Karen snapped, dropping her binder on the coffee table with a thud. That new resident, Dr. Johnson, somehow convinced Patricia to analyze all of my violation reports. They're calling it selective enforcement and disparate impact. They've given me a formal warning, Greg, me. Greg's expression shifted from concern to resignation. I've been trying to tell you for years that you've been too aggressive about the rules. Whose side are you on? Karen demanded. Yours, he said quietly. Always yours. But I've watched you get more and more caught up in these HOA regulations. Remember when we first moved in? You used to organize block parties and welcome new neighbors. When did that change? Karen sank onto the couch, the fight momentarily draining out of her. I just want our property values protected. That's all I've ever wanted. I know, Greg said, sitting beside her. But there's a difference between maintaining standards and what's been happening. Mrs. Gutierrez is in her 70s, Karen. Did you really need to report her 3 times for her garbage can? Rules are rules, Karen muttered, but with less conviction than usual. The next morning, Karen avoided her usual neighborhood patrol. Instead, she stayed home, alternating between checking the community Facebook group, where discussion of the meeting was surprisingly muted. Patricia must have warned people against public shaming, and gazing out her front window at the immaculate lawns of Oakwood Estates. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Karen peered through the peephole, surprised to see Marcus Johnson standing on her porch. Her first instinct was to ignore him, but curiosity won out. Dr. Johnson, she said stiffly after opening the door. What can I do for you? I thought we should talk, he replied. May I come in? Against her better judgment, Karen stepped aside. In her living room, Marcus declined her automatic offer of coffee and got straight to the point. I'm not here to antagonize you, Mrs. Mitchell. It certainly felt that way at last night's meeting, she countered. The analysis wasn't about you personally, Marcus explained. It was about identifying systemic issues in how our community governs itself. You've been here 3 weeks, Karen said flatly. I've dedicated years to this community. I believe that, Marcus said, surprising her. Your commitment to Oakwood Estates is obvious. That's why I'm here. The Equity Committee needs passionate, dedicated people who understand the bylaws inside and out. Karen blinked. You're inviting me to join your committee? After publicly humiliating me. The committee isn't mine, Marcus corrected. It belongs to the community. And yes, we need your expertise. But we also need you to listen to perspectives you might not have considered before. Karen studied him, searching for signs of mockery or condescension. She found none. This isn't charity, Marcus continued when she remained silent. You have institutional knowledge the committee needs. In return, you might gain some insights about how different residents experience community rules. And if I refuse, then the committee proceeds without your input, Marcus said simply. But I don't think that's what you really want. Karen considered his words carefully. Was this an opportunity or a trap?